Okay. Good evening from the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. My name is Phil Robertson. I'm a board member of the FCCT, and I'll be your moderator tonight for our event on the Paris Peace Accords, 30 years on. What has it meant for Cambodia? How is Cambodia doing now? And we have a very illustrious panel to join us and to speak today. I will be introducing them in turn. However, before we start, I want to make a few announcements about the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. Right now, the club is reopened, so people can visit. There is food service going on now, and soft drinks are available. Situation may change over a period of time, but we encourage the members of the FCCT to return to the clubhouse to come and enjoy your time with friends there. We have a number of very interesting programs which are going forward, and we will be endeavoring to work very hard to make sure that the members are, of course, safe and secure at the clubhouse with appropriate spacing connected to COVID-19 and all these other issues. We also want to encourage the membership of the FCCT to consider donating to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. I mean, as you know, this has been a very difficult time for the club. It has been a difficult time for business all over Thailand. And it is the membership and the support of the members that makes this club work. And so we greatly appreciate all the support. There are ways to donate. You can contact the office or the manager at fccthi.com. And we encourage you to get involved with the club and support the club going forward. My name again is Phil Robertson. I'm the board member of the FCCT, and I'm actually organizing this remote event. We have people from all around the world taking part today, but we're going to start first with a video that was done by former Australian Foreign Minister Gareth Evans, who was one of the key architects of the Paris Peace Accords and the diplomatic approach that finally did succeed in ending the civil war and bringing peace to Cambodia. He is unable to join us in person, but he did give us an 8-minute video that describes his thought process and his ideas and his views 30 years on after the Paris Peace Accords were signed on October 23rd, 1991. So without further ado, I'm going to ask our team in the FCCT to run that video, and then we will be back with our panelists.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to join you this evening, and I do apologise because of other commitments not being able to stick around for the discussion. It's really very hard to overemphasise the importance of the Paris peace agreements. Before their signing 30 years ago this week, Cambodia really was on its knees, ravaged successively by massive US bombing, by civil war, by the Khmer Rouge's reign of terror, invasion by the Vietnamese, and then civil war again. These onslaughts, above all the horrific Khmer Rouge genocide, caused the deaths of some 2 million Cambodians and effectively destroyed the lives of a great many more. Despite multiple peace attempts throughout the 1980s, the conflict, one of the most complex anywhere in the world, seemed almost hopelessly intractable, with the country internally divided between 4 warring factions, the countries of Southeast Asia themselves divided in their support for each, and the great powers similarly divided, with no consensus on a way forward anywhere in sight. But the Paris 1991 Accords did bring lasting peace to the country. And Australia, working closely with Indonesia, can I think remain proud of the role that we played in making that happen. In the Red Book proposal that we famously brought to the Jakarta informal meeting that was convened by Ali Alatas in February 1990, we initiated the diplomatic strategy that finally broke the impasse. Its essence, in a sentence, was to define an unprecedentedly hands-on central role for the United Nations in the actual governance of the country, not just election monitoring or peacekeeping, but the actual governance during a transitional period, which gave China then a face-saving way of withdrawing its support for the Khmer Rouge. I think it's also fair to say that the leadership of the UNTAC military mission by Australia's General John Sanderson during the critical 1991 to 1993 transition period was crucial to its success.
I mean, obviously the
Well, the international community did bring peace to Cambodia and with it some overdue national economic development. But that really is the end of the good news story. As to democracy and human rights, the other two core elements of the Paris Peace Agreements, it has to be acknowledged that the record has been one of dismal failure. The rot set in early. The 1993 election was a brilliant success. 90% turnout, incredibly moving experience to watch those voters and their families lined up for hours at polling stations, knowing the very high risk of bomb attacks, but with such joyful confidence in the future. But the election did not result in the expected win for Hun Sen, the incumbent leader who'd fought the Khmer Rouge. His refusal to accept the result, and the international community, far too meekly, in retrospect, went along with that. It allowed him to become joint Prime Minister. And this was the last fully free and fair election Cambodia was to hold. Clever and utterly ruthless, in a very short time, Hun Sen had vanquished his opponents, taken steps to ensure no opposition party could meaningfully contest his leadership. His CPP, the Cambodian People's Party, became synonymous with corruption, with land evictions, with control of the judiciary and army, with political repression, with wide-scale arrests and imprisonment, physical threats to those protesting the loss of human rights, and, on occasion, frankly, outright murder. Over 30 years, moreover, Hun Sen has amassed vast fortunes for his family, while almost 30% of Cambodians live barely above the poverty line, and a great many more survive on no more than around $3 a day, with COVID-19 adding immensely to economic as well as social distress. It seemed for a time that Hun Sen's authoritarianism might have run its course. In 2012, you remember, a wave of serious organised opposition began to develop, and the main opposition party, the CNRP, Cambodian National Rescue Party, almost won the 2013 election. But this was not an opportunity that Hun Sen would allow to be repeated. Repression intensified on multiple fronts, and with the 2018 general election looming, Hun Sen, in late 2017, arrested the opposition leader Kem Sokha, charged him with treason, disbanded his party altogether. Thousands fled overseas. There are no fig leaves left. Cambodia now can't be described as anything other than a dictatorship. So what can be done now? When it comes to the various relevant international organisations, I'm afraid my hopes are not very high. ASEAN has shown itself to be completely incapable of maintaining any kind of discipline over its members when it comes to internal democracy and human rights issues, with Myanmar just the most recent example. Despite the efforts of successive UN rapporteurs on human rights in Cambodia, appointed pursuant to the Paris Peace Agreements, starting with Australia's own Michael Kirby, it's been very hard to energise the Human Rights Council to take any kind of effective action, let alone energise the much more powerful Security Council. And partly that's been a product of the protection that's been routinely given Hun Sen's government by China. There does continue to be support among Cambodian activists for the reconvening of the Paris International Conference on Cambodia as provided for in the 1991 agreements. But really, there's no evident support for this from any of the Permanent Five, Security Council members or other key participants, all of whom have multiple other current distractions. And the strongest steps that the conference could take, if it did meet again, would be to refer human rights concerns back to the competent organs of the United Nations, back, in other words, to the essentially impotent Human Rights Council. I believe that the greatest hope for Cambodia's future lies with its own people, backed up with support and pressure, not so much from multilateral organisations, but individual countries genuinely committed to human rights and democracy, and who are capable of exercising some real pressure. Pressure in particular in the context of the next general election in 2023 to reverse the ban on the main opposition party and to enable the genuine exercise of universal civil and political rights across the whole community. targeted individual sanctions against key regime members and their families, basically asset freezes and other financial restrictions and visa bans, are probably the most useful forms of such pressure. After dragging its feet for years, the Australian government at last announced a couple of months ago its intention to enact a Magnitsky Act, so-called, to make easier the application of such sanctions in human rights cases, following US, UK, Canadian legislation so named to honour the Russian dissident Magnitsky, who was tortured and killed after exposing government corruption. It may be a triumph of hope over experience to believe that this will be passed any time soon in Canberra or applied with any vigour when it is, but when it is operational, the Hun Sen government should be one of its first targets, and there are many other countries who can and should be doing the same. Everything I know about the pride and the courage and the resilience of the Cambodian people tells me that the overwhelming majority clearly want the restoration of decency and dignity in the way that they're governed. I live in hope that their commitment will eventually be rewarded, so that Cambodia will in fact at last become the country we all wanted it to be when we did finally put to rest the ravages of genocide and civil war 30 years ago. Well, thank you for the opportunity to join you this evening, and I do apologise because of other commitments not being.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. It's a very interesting speech. It was a very strong speech by Gareth Evans. And it was an opportunity for him not only to review the situation, but also to call out what he said was very serious problems related to the failure to respect human rights and democracy going forward. That the elections were successful, that the end of the war was successful, but there were many problems afterwards. Unfortunately, the panelists were probably the only people who didn't hear that speech because there was a glitch with our Zoom program. So while it was going out live on the Facebook Live, we were unable to hear it here. But it is an important speech by Gareth Evans. It is one that indicates that there is, in fact, a mixed review for the Paris Peace Accords. That, in one hand, there was a success in ending the very, very dire situation, ending the threat of the Khmer Rouge, bringing peace, opening the way for development, and opening the way for civil society. But at the same time, that other promises by the Paris Peace Accords on democracy, on human rights, may not yet have been met. So with that, I'm going to turn to our speakers. The first speaker we have a pleasure to hear from is Pusu Tirak, who is the Executive Director of the Cambodian Institute for Cooperation and Peace. This was established back in 1993, making it actually contemporary of the UNTAC process and elections. The CICP is Cambodia's oldest foreign policy think tank, and it's Cambodia's leading platform for Track 2 foreign affairs dialogue. He's also served as ambassador to Japan from 2005 to 2009, and as a Secretary of State at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Phnom Penh. He was elected MP and also served in the cabinet in the first post-Paris Peace Accords agreement government in the 1990s as a Minister of Industry, Mines, and Energy, and he joins us from Phnom Penh. So, Ambassador, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Phil. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? All right, thank you. I am privileged to be invited by the Foreign Correspondent Club of Thailand to take part in this important online discussion on the Paris Peace Accord after 30 years. I am equally pleased to be able to share this panel with other distinguished speakers. I would like to share my personal view, how we should remember the PPA 30 on now. Let me begin by recalling that the so-called Cambodian problem were very complex and it was seen as intractable conflicts. What have happened in the past were the result of three discontent forces that play over the issues of internal conflicts, peace, and sovereignty of Cambodia. The first level of irritation had occurred due to the tussle inside the country between and among the Cambodian varying factions, with the armed forces of the People's Republic of Cambodia fighting against the militia forces of the Coalition Government of Democratic Cambodia, CGDK. The second level of animosity have to do with the culminations of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, known as ASEAN, regional determinations in their relentless effort to oppose the spread of communism in favor of the CGDK, which categorically resisted the Vietnamese intrusions over Cambodia independence. And the third layer of acrimony came about due to the antagonistic attitude of great power engaging in Cambodian conflict, with China supporting strongly the Khmer Rouge faction in resisting against the Vietnamese occupations, the Soviet Union supporting Vietnam fait accompli, and the United States backing up the alternative choice for a free and democratic Cambodia of the two non-communist resistant group, Phun Sinh Pech and KPNLF movement. The prospects of a major UN involvement in the transitional administrations of Cambodia have transpired as early as in March 1981, when occasionally Prince Norodom Sihanouk raised the idea of some form of United Nations trusteeship over Cambodia. However, it was in late 1989 that the Congressman Stephen Sola of the United States proposed a UN to play a central role to end the Cambodian tragedy. After that, the initiative was taken up more vigorously by the Honorable Foreign Minister Gareth Evans to engage Australia in a strenuous diplomatic effort to garner support from the international community to find political solutions acceptable to all parties in order to solve the intractable conflicts in Cambodia. So finally, 30 years ago this year, the agreement on the comprehensive political settlement of the Cambodian conflicts was signed on 23rd October 1991 by the four Cambodian factions and the international participants at the Second Paris Conference on Cambodia. The settlement gives the United Transitional Authority in Cambodia, known as UNTAC, full authority to govern Cambodia from March 1992 to September 1993, and commit the Cambodian party and those supporting them to a permanent ceasefire, repatriations of the displaced Khmer along the border with Thailand, disarm and demobilize factional armies, prepare Cambodia free and fair elections, and adopt a new democratic constitution. Now, for me, the Paris Peace Agreement was the product of a landmark collaboration between Cambodia and the international community to work together to restore independence and sovereignty of Cambodia and to rebuild the country into a peaceful, democratic, and developed nation. For that, I am gratified to all stakeholders involved in the Paris Peace Agreement. On a positive note, what one can say without exaggeration that the UN blueprint for Cambodia succeed where previous attempt, which is confrontational approach and the use of military force, have failed primarily because the international community, including regional blocs such as ASEAN and domestic Cambodian party, were supporting of a negotiated peace settlement. Hence, the Paris Peace Agreement gave rise to a political solution instead of a military one, which warrant a prospect of national reconciliation and a Cambodia that is free from external dominations. On a negative note, one cannot dispute the failure of UNTAC to deal with the refusal of disarm and demobilize the 40,000 strong armed forces of Democratic Cambodia, which this led down, and the inability of the UN Blue Helmet to break open Cambodia territory under the Khmer Rouge control has raised the debate by some scholars to challenge the global evaluations of the agreement that UNTAC have had had not been able to implement its intended mandate properly, and as such, peace accord have failed partially to bring peace to Cambodia, as UNTAC failed to end the Khmer Rouge threat. Now let's talk about the current context. The direct relevance of Paris Peace Agreement in the current political context of Cambodia is currently being debated. Progress along the road toward a fully inclusive, transparent, and fair government is inherently an ongoing process in any democracy, and Cambodia roads have not always been an even and a direct route. Despite significant progress, there are still delays and sometimes significant bumps in the road that will need to be addressed through continued effort across a range of challenging issues. The PPA provide an initial roadmap for Cambodia themselves to rely on as they navigate this path, and gave Cambodia a unique chance to rehabilitate and reconstruct itself as a modern functioning nation. After 30 years, Cambodia has transformed significantly from a war-torn country that once experienced mass atrocity to a fast-developing and responsible member of the international community. While significant challenges remain in the country development path, there's no doubt that Cambodia can stand on its own 2 feet as a unitary, sovereign, and independent nation with development well underway. And these, thanks to the desire for peace and spirit of national reconciliation born from the Cambodian leaders, as well as a strong support from the international community as stipulated in the PPA 3 decades ago. Now, I would like to end my remark by mentioning that the Paris Peace Agreement constitutes a breakthrough moment for Cambodia and the international community by successfully crafting a comprehensive political resolution to end the Cambodian dramatic past and bring forward the much anticipated peace and development. For the 1991 PPA continue to be of relevant testament for a great promise of a good future for Cambodia. Both Cambodia and all signatory states should continue to honor the pledge in accordance with the spirit and the essence of the agreement for the achievement of a lasting of positive peace and the protections of sovereignty and independence of Cambodia and the fulfillment of all other commitments stipulated in the agreement. I thank you very much, and I look forward to an active, engaged discussion after other speakers speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Appreciate your staying to time, and thank you very much for that very clear, concise summary of the situation and how we got here. Now let me turn to Sam Rancy. Sam Rancy is the acting president of the Cambodian National Rescue Party, or the CNRP. He actually hardly needs an introduction, but I'll give him one anyways. He was an elected member of parliament multiple times. He served as the opposition leader in the Cambodian National Assembly in between 2013 and 2015. He's also served in the cabinet of the first post-Paris Peace Accord government for 2 years as the Minister of Finance. And he joins us from Paris. So Rancy, please take the floor.
Thank you, Phil Robertson, and thank you to the Foreign Correspondent Club of Thailand for allowing me to be a part of this panel. I could hear Gareth Evans very clearly because I was following our discussion on another computer where our discussion is being posted live. The Paris Peace Agreement on Cambodia is an international treaty. Any international treaty must be respected because otherwise it will set a very bad precedent, very bad example for other international treaties. The credibility of the signatories and the credibility of the international community is at stake. So I would like to draw first a lesson from the implementation of the Paris Peace Agreement on Cambodia. Definitely, the UN left too soon, because you cannot bring back democracy, restore democracy just in 1 year or 2 years. Otherwise, the non-democratic, the anti-democratic force will take over and will dominate the situation again. I think the lesson has been learned in the former Yugoslavia, when the United Nations forces remained longer, more than 2 years. And also in East Timor. East Timor was a success story because the UN remained long enough to stabilize the situation, to allow democracy to take roots, which is not the case of Cambodia. There are 3 aspects, 3 chapters in the Paris Agreement. One is related to peace. The second is related to reconstruction after the war. And the third is related to democracy or democratization. I think for the first 2 part, it is relatively satisfactory because the war was ended. There was a massive injection of funds, international assistance to help the reconstruction of Cambodia. What is really problematic and very disappointing is the chapter on democracy. And in the chapter of democracy, there are many aspects. I think that the other panelists will elaborate on those different chapters. As for me, I would like to stress one particular aspect of the democratic process. Is related to elections. We are peaceful, non-violent, freedom fighters. Therefore, we not only believe on elections, but we count, and we only count on elections. What does the Paris Peace Agreement say about election in Cambodia? It says that Cambodia must organize authentic and periodic election. So we have to analyze the word authentic. Authentic means free, fair, and open election. And since the election organized by the United Nations in 1993, Cambodia has never seen free, fair, and open election. I'm speaking on behalf of the Cambodia National Rescue Party, which is the only credible opposition party. At the last 2 elections, which we took part to, we collected 45% of the popular vote. And this in spite of very serious irregularities, election irregularities in favor of the ruling party. Had those elections been a little bit more free, more fair, we definitely would have won those elections, 45%. And what is the situation now? We have been banned. We have been dissolved, and all our leaders have been excluded, banned from politics for 5 years, and this ban could be prolonged for another 5-year period. And after we being banned and our party dissolved, the ruling party organized a fake election without any participation of the CNRP. Then they managed to win 100% of the seats at the National Assembly. 125 seats on 125 seats. These are fake elections. In no country which pretend to be a democratic, any party cannot win 100% of the seats, especially when a party which won at least nearly half of the popular vote when it could participate in those elections was not allowed to take part. And now the election, we can see there's no way the election can be considered free, given the atmosphere of fear and intimidation, even of terror. Anybody can be arrested immediately on the spot if they express any criticism against the regime, and not only political opponents. I'm thinking of environmentalists, journalists, the youth, even singers, religious people, the monks could be arrested. So how can you call this election free? Impossible. And fair. No way it is fair in any way. The election is organized by the Electoral Commission, named National Election Committee, the NEC, which is totally controlled by the ruling party. And this election can only be manipulated, not only on voting day, but since the establishment of voter lists. I'm grateful to NDI, the American National Democratic Institute, which first denounced the manipulation of the voter list. So elections in Cambodia is a foregone conclusion and open. Now Hun Sen chooses his opponents. He does not allow any real opponents who would be independent, which would not need his money, which is not afraid of his threat. We would not be allowed to take part. So I think organizing proper elections is very crucial. And what can we do to ensure better elections in the future, especially next year in June 2022, there will be commune or local elections, and the following year in July 2023, there will be national elections. Then Cambodia really will be at the crossroad if free and fair and open election are allowed to take place. I think the West should use its soft power more than any sanctions, threat, etc. It's soft power, because the West is the position, and only the West is in the position to set the standard for legitimate elections. And only legitimate elections can bring about legitimate government. I think Hun Sen will be sensitive if Western countries say that we would not recognize any election which are not in line with what the Paris Peace Agreement has stated: authentic, meaning free, fair, and open election. And this would have far-reaching consequences if the Western nations, including the United Nations, which have been sponsoring the Paris Peace Agreement, if the next election are not in line with international standards. I think the world community, except maybe China, should say that no, these elections are not valid, are not legitimate. And any institution, any government stemming from such election will not be considered legitimate. This would have far-reaching consequences on the Hun Sen regime. So Hun Sen will have to consider twice before going on with his plan to organize fake elections. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that intervention. Appreciate you staying the time. And thank you for joining us. We're very privileged to have you here. Now let me turn to our next speaker. This is Elizabeth Becker, who's a well-known journalist and writer. She began her career as a war correspondent for the Washington Post in Cambodia. And for this audience is probably best known as the author of the book, When the War Was Over, Cambodia and the Khmer Rouge Revolution. She has been a senior foreign editor for the National Public Radio and for the New York Times, covering national security, economics, and foreign policy. She's won numerous accolades. She's also the author of a recently published book, You Don't Belong Here, How Three Women Rewrote the Story of War, about three pioneering women reporters during the Vietnam War era. And she joins us from Washington, D.C. So Elizabeth, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us.
Excuse me. Thank you, Phil, for inviting me. It's a privilege to be on this panel with such great Cambodian speakers and leaders. And thank you to the Foreign Press Club, Foreign Correspondents Club. Let me speak here as a journalist and a historian. I would like to be very linear and just review what has happened and where I think how these speakers who sound like they're describing sometimes different countries and different organizations may actually be talking about the same thing. First, what war ended with the Paris peace agreements? This is even in debate. I'll just go through the list. 1970, Cambodia gave up its neutrality to join the Vietnam War, the American war in Vietnam. And the United States backed the Khmer Republic. Prince Sihanouk, which had kept that neutrality for almost 20 years, he went on the side of China and the Khmer Rouge. The Vietnamese, North Vietnamese joined the battle as the American invaded. So you had every layer that an earlier speaker was talking about. Cambodia joined the Vietnam War, and we know the result was the Khmer Rouge victory, thanks to the communist side. So then the war continues in the form of genocide from 75 to 79. Then the Vietnamese, prompted by a border war started by Pol Pot, the Vietnamese invaded Cambodia and got rid of the Khmer Rouge, a genocidal regime. They expected to be applauded. In fact, they were condemned, and a new war grew out of this, described on one side as an attempt to get rid of the Vietnamese occupation, and on the other side, which is now Vietnam occupying Cambodia with Hun Sen as one of the leaders, that side saying, no, we're protecting you from the genocidal Khmer Rouge. So you see what kind of layers we have. This has all been fueled by China, the United States on one side at this stage, and the Soviet Union on the side of the Vietnamese. The Vietnamese left on their own in 1989. And I think that's where we should start talking about the peace accords. Once the Vietnamese said, okay, we're retreating, we're going back to our country, suddenly the world said, uh-oh, the Khmer Rouge might come back to power. And that's when you see the real push for a peace treaty, because the Europeans, ASEAN, the United States did not want to be in the position of, we set the stage for a Khmer Rouge return. So then you have the negotiations, which Gareth Evans talked about, and Sutiak, and now Samran Si spoke about. And the outcome was, as they all said, a remarkable document that set the stage for a constitution of liberal democracy, human rights, and, as they said, free and fair election. I'll just go into, so that was a success, no question. Everybody realized that they had to get together on every single level. And the final document was conceived by the 5 permanent members of the United Nations and all the Cambodian parties. UNTAC, United Nations, then goes into Cambodia, sets the stage for the elections. And as everyone has said, the elections themselves were a success. Prince Ranariddh of the Royalist Party won 45% of the vote, or 58 seats. Hun Sen, to his great shock, lost. He came in second, winning only 38% of the votes and 51 seats. Remember that, because this is the beginning of the problem. The election succeeded, but Hun Sen immediately refused to give up his government, and several of his ministers threatened secession. So you have a crisis. The United Nations has just had the successful election, and everything was going to blow up their face. They did, to speak about the blue helmets, they did not have the right. They did not have the right to stay and fight back. So the compromise was reached. that an entirely new position was created to allow Hun Sen to be a co-prime minister. So in a sense, the voice of the people was negated. So the leadership then was divided, going straight into the first government. And those, we journalists coming in and out, historians, you can see the division right from the beginning. Yes, it was a wonderful beginning of reconstruction, human rights, a civil society space was created. It was a very exciting time for Cambodia. But then national elections were coming up, and the uneasy political settlement of two prime ministers, it exploded. And Hun Sen, once again, instead of waiting for the elections, he precluded that and did the equivalent of a coup d'etat against Prince Ranawat. So now we have a single leader, Hun Sen, going into the elections. So we have 2 times we've lost the ability to have those democratic elections. We still have the semblance of it. And I would say at this point that one of the great achievements of the peace accords was that you had, as a result, enough of an open space to have the ECCC, the Khmer Rouge Tribunal, which I think everyone recognizes is very important to Cambodian history, that the senior Khmer Rouge leaders were tried, and we have a record of what happened during the regime. It, for the first time, was spoken out in the open, etc. Then the next election that Mr. Samransi was just mentioning, that of course was blocked. And in 2017, journalists especially remember that was the end of the free press in Cambodia. And all of the newspapers and the journalists we knew closed down. And the independent free press has pretty much disappeared from Cambodia. So that's where we are now. The Paris Accords, I'm not judging as a politician or as a diplomat who has reasonable pride in all of this, but it's, yes, it has given Cambodia a civil space that many of its neighbors don't have, but this is not a representative democracy. And it's losing its, the human rights and all of the things that were within the agreement. Every year, journalists go in and describe how they are being lost. And that's why you see the different evaluations of it that we're going to hear on the panel now. I'm going to stay in time, and thank you very much, Phil.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for your contribution and for your perspective over that long period. Quite clearly, there is a lot of differing ideas about what the Paris Peace Accords are and what the outcome was. And there's also been a long discussion about issues of democracy and human rights. And actually, we're going to hear from Chaksopiep, who's a real expert in this area. Chaksopiep is the executive director of the Cambodian Center for Human Rights, or the CCHR. And that's one of the premier human rights groups that's still operating inside Cambodia. And frankly, one of the most courageous activists I know in Cambodia. She's respected by diplomats and UN officials for excellent human rights analysis, and also by communities in Cambodia for her consistent advocacy against human rights violations and working in partnership with communities facing problems. So prior to working for CCHR, she was not surprisingly mobilizing young activists around the country in civic engagement through the Cambodian Youth Network for Change. But she's been at CCHR for a number of years and really led that organization in a very, very serious and creative way. And I'm happy to have her on the panel. And Sophia, please share your perspectives.
Thank you so much, Phil, and good evening and good morning to our speaker here, as well as to our audience who are following right now. And I think the difficult job as a last speaker is after hearing a lot of insight from the previous speaker, it's really like full. But I would like to begin with a personal reflection as young generation, learning, and perhaps we can say that I'm one of the benefit from the Paris Peace Agreement legacy. And as Elizabeth pointed out, she speaks as as the journalist and historian, but for me, I'm speaking as a human rights and peace advocate, and as a young generation and benefit from the Paris Peace Agreement. And last week, I just found out from my library, the Paris Peace Agreement documentation, and then I start to read again, after read many times, and then when I read, and then because of the time constraint as well, I said to my husband, saying that, oh, it's a bit long, I have to stop a while to continue later on. And then he said, oh, come on, you just read, but you imagine, the one who worked on the paper, how hard they have to put effort to come about this documentation. And then I totally agree with his notion, because, for us as a young generation, we take it for granted, just reading it, we feel, oh, it's so long. But imagine the one who involved, like Gareth Evans and other who have been the major party, and as well as the signatory who worked so hard, and based on the record, it takes over 3 years. We celebrate, on the 23rd October 1991, but the process is not just a few days to come up with this agreement. It is a long process that come so far to come to the point that a different party, with the support of the other 18 signatory to support Cambodia, to bring our problem on table. And so I would like to mark the 30th anniversary with my sincere thanks to those who have put a lot of effort, time, and energy. I could understand how frustration, how tense, and the difficult, the dilemma that they all have to face. Because the other day I joined the same the panel organized by the United States Institute of Peace. They celebrate the same panel discussion on the 30th anniversary of Paris Peace Agreement. And in that panel, one of the speakers, which is a well-known scholar, Dr. Sopong Pal, he made his first remark saying that, as a Khmer survivor, and I think when we're talking about the Paris Peace Agreement, we have to also acknowledge the suffering of many Cambodian family that have lost their family, their loved one during the genocide. So for him, he pointed out, and it touched me a lot, and that's why I quote his remark. He said that one of the struggle for him at the moment he learned about Paris Peace Agreement is having a Khmer actor as one of the party in the agreement, the one who sit at the table to discuss about the peace process. So for him, it's really difficult to accept it. But he acknowledged, and he support the Paris Peace Agreement, because he believed that it is no choice for us, to come to the state of a peace transition, and therefore I just want to point out that the rationale and the effort that many people come to the agreement should not be underestimated. We should try to work further to ensure that those efforts come to the real goal. And when we're talking about Paris Peace Agreement, of course, there have been a controversy as always, because many Cambodian government officials have keep saying that the Paris Peace Agreement is no longer relevant. And I would argue, as always, that it is relevant, and we all have to keep it lively because of, like the agreement itself. It is about the settlement, political settlement of the conflict in Cambodia, but also the agreement point out clearly the goal is about peace building process. And this peace building process, of course, it's not end by just the merely absence of war. Because when we're talking about peace, and as a peace graduate, I would repeat, the definition of peace, because it always been confused by many. And while in Cambodia, every street or every banner with like with the message of saying peace, but I don't think we really acknowledge the full meaning of peace. So the peace is not just the absence of a war or conflict, but the peace is when the citizen can fully enjoy the fundamental freedom, and that has been made clearly in the Paris Peace Agreement. So I believe that the drafter who work hardly on the agreement, they know clearly that to support Cambodia process is not just the end of the world, but peace process. Peace building, the restoration and peace building. That's why a lot of effort by the international community supporting Cambodia in the early 90s up to this point still continue. And I would come to the second point, given the time as well. I want to acknowledge when we're talking about Paris Peace Agreement, we have to look both the positive and the incomplete or the certain failure that we're still struggling. I think previous speaker talked a lot about certain failure, but I think we have and also acknowledge a certain effort as well. And I totally agree that with the Paris Peace Agreement, different parties have played their role to ensure somehow the absence of war. So we could somehow see that the conflict ended, so other process can continue. Although, like Ambassador Sotirak mentioned, even with that early stage, one of the failure is that it's not a complete end of the Khmer Rouge guerrilla or armed force. So that should also credit to Cambodian government back then, who even after UNTAC left, they continue with the disarmament and the military integration process, and with the I think win-win strategy could also be should be acknowledged here. And secondly, I think with the Paris Peace Agreement, it gives us the foundation with with the Constitution, and if we read in the Paris Peace Agreement document here, together with a Cambodian Constitution, I could see a lot of language have been copied and followed the goal of the Paris Peace Agreement. And we always refer to the Constitution as as an advocate. We always refer that the major law in Cambodia, which is the Constitution, have outlined and protect the human right for citizens to engage fully. But the real application of the Constitution is another story. And by just adopting the Constitution is not also the end of the process. With many Cambodian government now try to argue that, well, after the adoption of Constitution, that's it. Paris Peace Agreement is no longer relevant, which I still argue it. And also, the government have engaged a lot of with the UN process, recognize a number of international human rights instruments. With I think it also gives us the ground, and so somehow the government commitment to the to the pathway to the island of peace, as we mentioned in the Paris Peace Agreement and the Constitution. But I think when it comes to the problem, is the I think so far, even after 30 years, Cambodia is still facing the the problem of institutional challenges, which means that we don't have a strong institution. Although the Constitution mentioned clearly, and in the agreement also highlight the need for separation of power, the executive body, the legislative body, and the court. But in real practice, the body have not been clearly functioning independently and under this executive power. And this is a major problem because it affects a lot of population. When we're talking about land right abuse, we're talking about human right abuse, we're talking about other issues that people need justice. It is a question to the court, the independence of the court, and another institution challenges is the independence of the military power. And this is really a huge problem because when the military can be independent and the military have to by line with the ruling government, I think that is clearly dangerous for our country, and there's really a need for us to ensure that any support from international community as well need to really strengthen the institutional strength, build a strong institution, not build a strong individual or man. Secondly, I think when it comes to the pillar of democracy, I think previous speaker highlight a lot from the election point of view, and of course His Excellency Sovereignty as a politician, he and given the CNOP have been dissolved, he outcry a lot about this, which I think it is a fact, but I think it affects more than the electoral process. It means that the key pillar of democracy have been quite harassed, have been attacked, not just the politician, but also the human rights advocate, the CSO and union and honorary citizen have been strengthened for their exercise of fundamental freedom. And finally, I think, of course, we acknowledge the legacy and the effort of the government on the economic side. There have been a kind of progress in the economic growth at certain point, and due to COVID, I think not just Cambodia, but the whole world have been hugely affected. But I think although we acknowledge the poverty reduction, certain effort to the economic growth, there's a question of sustainable development. There's a question of the maintenance of the natural resource. With every day we can see, the land filling, the lake filling, the sea filling, or even the river filling that hugely affect the natural resource. And the environmental advocate, mostly young activists, at the moment have been in trouble, and a number of them have been still in the pre-trial detention or under the charge of incitement, and some even charge of plotting against the state, which is a serious criminal accusation. And so, with this 30th anniversary of the Paris Peace Agreement, I recall to Cambodian government as well as the signatory to really, revisit this Paris Peace Agreement, not just when we come to a moment of 30th anniversary, but, on a daily basis, we should consult on the agreement, and make sure that all the signatory are obliged to what they have promised, and make sure, and finally is the I think the spirit of Paris Peace Agreement, where different fractions can come to the table of discussion, allow us to think how as a nation, how as a different politician can come together to a discussion for and put the national interest on the top. Not, I'm talking about, national interest, not any politician, not any political party interest. So I encourage both His Excellency Sovereignty here, as well as, the ruling government, ruling party leader, to think of the population interest, so we can come to the unity and use the Paris Peace Agreement spirit as a way forward for us. So we hope in the next 30 years, Cambodia can really come to the point that we can say, yes, Cambodia achieved both the negative and positive peace. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Very important to hear the voice of the younger generation about what Paris Peace Accords mean. We're going to now turn to the FCCT. If there is any questions from the audience there, we will receive them. People can go to the microphone and ask questions. But while that's happening, I'm going to ask the first question as the moderator, which is that in fact, there has been a discussion by some groups, some organizations about the idea of somehow reopening the Paris International Conference, that somehow there needs to be a revisitation to the Paris Peace Accords. And to date, that has not happened. I know that there has been efforts to try to approach some of the governments, Australia, Indonesia, others, to urge that to happen. I wanted to ask the panelists what they think about the possibility of, revisiting the Paris Peace Accords. Is that possible? Is it advisable? And if so, what would come out of it? And the floor is open. That's a question to everyone.
You should ask Elizabeth.
Okay, Elizabeth, go first.
I'm afraid I'll have to give a very short answer because, as you know, I have to leave right now. Treaties are rarely ever opened up again. And I see no political will for this at all. I think it's very much like other treaties that we respect them by reinvigorating them, but I see no political will for it. And I really don't see a real precedent that even could be called on. But anyway, it's been an honor and a privilege to be with you all. And like everyone, I hope the letter as well as the spirit of the agreement comes to pass in Cambodia. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Elizabeth. We greatly appreciate your time, and thanks so much for all your interest over the years and continuing to monitor this and push it forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
So as Elizabeth leaves, I'll put that question to the rest of the panel. Is the Paris Peace Accord something that can be reopened? Or can it be, in fact, reinvigorated, as Elizabeth said in her parting remarks there? What is possible?
Yes, I think there is another motivation for pushing for an effective implementation of the Paris Peace Agreement. And this is related to the neutrality of Cambodia. We have talked about democracy. But there is another point now, which is getting crucial, which is the neutrality. And actually, dictatorship, Hun Sen dictatorship, has led to Cambodia siding with China, because Hun Sen has received a massive and unconditional support from China. And he has allowed China to come to Cambodia to build many facilities which can be turned overnight to military facilities. So if there is not enough motivation to revive democracy in Cambodia, there should be more motivation to ensure that Cambodia abide by a neutrality stance as enshrined in the Paris Peace Agreement. I think many countries now would like to see Cambodia adopt a truly neutral stance when it comes to the tension in the South China Sea.
Sorry, I'm muted. Other comments, please?
I would like to join here. I would echo what Gareth have mentioned, regardless how he, assess the challenges to, achieve the Paris Peace Agreement completely. But he remained hopeful, on the individual as well as the signatory country to take action. And I totally agree that, that require signatory, beside Cambodia, if Cambodia choose to say that, the Paris Peace Agreement is no longer relevant, or, the state of fundamental freedom continue to be violated in the context of, the justification that is it is the application of rule of law, because that's what the government defend themselves. So I still believe that individual country have to take action in a way, you know, like they have the framework. The individual country have a framework that put the human right respect and protection as a core foundation. Therefore, you know, any bilateral, any aid or trade relationship have to reevaluate on this human right principle. And having respect that, I think that is a way to contribute to the achievement of the Paris Peace Agreement, even after 30 years, when we know that, you know, Cambodia have not fulfilled the complete peace, and that require every one of us, as well as an individual citizen, to take part. I think there's while we talk a lot about the problem side, I mean the civic space that have been cracked down, on the other side of coin, I also see the kind of opportunity. I see the the reason why there's a repression, there's a restriction. It is also the indicator of the emerging or the demand of change from the population. And when I say change here, it's not, I have to make clear here that it's not about to support the opposition agenda. But I know that CNOP have the slogan of change, but when I'm talking about change here, is the social change, is you know, the demand for people want to see justice, the demand of people to see the human right respected, the demand that people want to see the proper management of natural resource, for example, so that equal distribution are shared with the population. So these are the things that we can see, because of the right of people, the right of the community to demand for that. That's why I think it clashes with the government who want to maintain the power. So I believe that when we see we see the problem in front of us, we should try to analyze further as well that the problem lies because people want change. So I think that moment had to continue and ensure that the space provided to the citizen. That's why I recall that it's important for every of us, including the signatory, to make sure that they support that momentum, that young and larger population can have the space to engage in this society. Thank you.
Okay, here's my view. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Very clear.
Answering your question, Phil, can we invoke the Paris Peace Agreement again, based on what we have heard, the lack of democracy, the lack of human rights, and so on and so forth. Now, here's my answer. When we want to do something, when we decide to do something, we need to also question whether that is doable. Can that be done? That I think any intellectual individual would want to assess that. Now, Elizabeth Becker provided a clear partial answer to this already. She never seen any treaty re-invoke it again based on, to me, issues have to be more grave than this to invoke the Paris Peace Agreement. And that in my view, if the sovereignty of Cambodia is violated, flagrantly violated again, then I think signatories have every reason to come together. That's the first point. The second point is that as a practitioner, His Excellency Sam Rainsy, I have great respect. He truly a nationalist. His view is done in the best interest for Cambodia. Josephine is likewise. Her view is to promote social justice and to give freedom to the people. All of them I respected. Now, as a practitioner of what you're trying to do, here's my suggestion. Democracy, human rights, these are parts of the universal declarations. Any state have to do their best to promote it. Now, based on these two benchmarks, and you try to invoke the Paris Peace Agreement again, I don't think there's any appetite now. All other signatories, they have a bigger problem to resolve: the pandemic, COVID-19 crisis in Myanmar. ASEAN now is fully occupied with that. The tussle for dominance between the US and China for global power is at stake relentlessly. And now Europe is coming up with their own free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. You see AUKUS, you have, the theater outside of Cambodia is much more stronger force for countries who are signatory to the Paris Peace Agreement to become preoccupied with. So even if we desire for them to, I don't think they will ever come back on these issues. And also, as I mentioned to you, the Paris Peace Agreement, if we were to remember this, it is a culmination of all parties involved, particularly the Khmer leader and the international community, to set a stage for Cambodia to take destiny in your own hand, in our own hand. We Cambodians have to do that. So these are problems that we, Your Excellency Sam Rainsy himself and her Joseph Pierre as an eminent advocate for human rights and social justice have to also engage in this process. And the main actor in this aspect is the government. You want free and fair election, you need to deal effectively with the government. Okay. And I can tell you, I live here for the rest, I've been here for a long time. I think there is a desire from the government to aspire what you have said already: credible, free, open elections and open society, freedom. The government have no shortage of that in terms of idea, in terms of desire, but the implementation and the human factor that associated with it is a big problem here. And so Joseph Pierre talked about institutional weaknesses, is precisely this. Our citizen, the so-called civil servant who work to, and you also talk about the military sometimes pledge allegiance to the party. That's not in the 21st century, you never hear it. And this is the problematic about civil society, a civil servant in Cambodia. They need to be honest, capable, and free from any kind of political ideology. But see, all this we need to work together. In my view is that Paris Peace Agreement will remain as relevant as we want it to. Both Cambodia and the international community want it to. And what is it to do? We need to work together. We need to fine tuning. We need to have compromise. We need to accept the reality. And I think until all Khmer can come together and agree that we have a homework, each one of us have also homework to do in all respect to everything that you said, which is very important to the future of Cambodia. So my message is that I don't believe we can provoke or invoke Paris Peace Agreement. Again, no one's gonna help doing it. The UN will not do it. Any single country will not do it, signatory to it. And it is, on the same time, it is our own homework, our Cambodian homework we must work together to ensure that we can do this together in a compromise, tolerance, and acceptable in the spirit of national reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you for that very comprehensive answer. It really is to the Cambodian people who this issue and these concerns are raised. These are the sort of things that I think have been discussed for a long time in Cambodian civil society. And actually, I would say one of the things, taking off my hat a little bit as the moderator, I would also say that one of the big benefits from the Paris Peace Accords and the whole process was really the growth of civil society. Cambodia has an extremely vibrant NGO sector. It has, of course, faced some restrictions recently. But I'm also interested in to what extent the Paris Peace Accords is something that the Cambodian people themselves are talking about, not just in this 30th anniversary year, but, how much awareness is there of this kind of history within Cambodia, and what needs to be done to, talk about this, promote this, to talk about the issues that were discussed at the Paris Peace Accords, and also the agreement and the various provisions of that accord. So let me throw that question to the panelists. What are the Cambodian people thinking and doing about this at this time?
I think the Paris Peace Agreements gave to Cambodians, especially the younger generation, the idea of universal values. Because what is said in the Paris Peace Agreement is that Cambodians are entitled to those universal values of freedom, justice, democracy, rule of law, good governance. When the young generation, they were born under the Lon Nol regime, under the Khmer Rouge regime, they have never experienced those ideas, those values, those principles. But reading in the Paris Peace Agreement that Cambodians are entitled to enjoy fundamental freedom, and in a practical way, not in a theoretical way. So this gives them motivation to fight for the implementation of the Paris Peace Agreement, meaning through the implementation of the Paris Peace Agreement, they will effectively enjoy the freedom that they cherish in their heart, and they want to see implemented in everyday life in the Cambodian society.
Thank you. Sapiep, what do you think about that? I mean, obviously you're a leading NGO voice in Cambodia today. What are you seeing as you're talking to the grassroots, as you're talking to people in the course of your work?
I think we have to be frank here that, when we're talking about Paris Peace Agreement, of course, not all the population are talking about it. I think what is important is to recognize that, the population are exercising the fundamental freedom. People, want peace. That is a clear cut. There's no question. I think it is not about, it's like we're talking about ASEAN or talking about UN. Ordinary citizens would not bother mind about this kind of bureaucratic or, institutional work. But I think it is the daily operation. It is how people exercise their freedom that have been left or have been benefit from the Paris Peace Agreement, have been connoted in the Constitution. So, but although not the whole population discuss Paris Peace Agreement on a daily basis, but they exercise the spirit of Paris Peace Agreement. And of course, with the awareness effort of some, I know there's an initiative by some young who try to promote Paris Peace Agreement, civil society advocate like us, we try to, discuss the Paris Peace Agreement like we did today, and other agencies too. But I think the core value that people on the ground have is the real exercise of that spirit. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador, please, what are your thoughts on this?
Thank you. I think you raise a very important questions. In my view, I like Joseph here. I don't believe that the population have any, they're not aware of it. They sort of like, they never been exposed or encouraged or give to them the opportunity to be exposed to the spirit of the Paris Peace Agreement. They were the recipients of this peace, the effects of the Paris Peace Agreement, but they do not know. And this is, I think we cannot blame the Paris Peace Agreement themselves, nor anyone else. Now, to me, the Paris Peace Agreement is like an impetus. It's like a catalyst that can spark for the second kingdom to reborn with liberal democracy, human rights as enshrined in the Constitution. It's still there. It's still there. It's not, but the implementations of it, it's problematic, and we have to recognize that in Cambodia go at war between each other too long, far too long. We don't trust each other. We don't seem to be able to fine tuning how we can share power or share view or share anything. The society is polarized, and this is not the intent of the Paris Peace Agreement. This is probably leader, intellectual, particularly leaders such as His Excellency Sam Rainsy and Joseph Thiep, need to propagate a more resonance approach to attract people to address or to come to terms with these issues. At the same time, I believe that there ought to be an educational aspects to the Paris Peace Agreement. I believe it because everything that is done there, like Joseph was mentioning, it's a Herculean task to get everybody to agree. We have to give a lot of gratitude to the UN, to His Excellency, the Honorable Gareth Evans, to Australia for playing a leadership role, to all power that agree that no longer we need this confrontational aspect. We need to compromise and find a political solution. So I believe there ought to be an educational aspect to it. So if any country that worry or care about what Joseph said, bring it, relate the everyday life that they need freedom, freedom of speech, freedom to express themselves, and to be recipients of social justice, the independent of the courts, and good governance, public services, education, shelters, agriculture, clean water, whatever you say, it's still eminent in Cambodia, which the deprived and the destitute, those who remain at the remote area are not receiving it properly. A question of sustainability of development have to also be addressed properly. So I support the idea that there ought to be an educational effort. It will charm me a lot if I see university have some kind of maybe not complete curriculum, but every now and then they talk about the Paris Peace Agreement. That would be really good for the younger generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I mean, just to continue that discussion, I mean, what plans are being actually made in Phnom Penh to commemorate this anniversary? I mean, we're coming up on this. This is 4 days away. Is the government planning to do something to commemorate this, the Paris Peace Accords and the 30th anniversary? Is there some sort of diplomatic or UN plan for some sort of action that would be talking about this? That, I mean, two of our speakers are in Phnom Penh. What have you heard?
Okay, I can maybe take a lead here, and Joseph can come in. For your information, the government, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Cambodia will celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Paris Peace Agreement on the 23rd, exactly on that date. It happened to be Saturday, but they take it to do that. Officially, the program has been out. I am invited to attend. I will attend. It will happen at the Peace Palace at the government building, not at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I know that eminent embassy that is a signatory to it has been invited. Whether they come or not, it's subject to their availability. So, and to add on to it, during the 25th anniversary of the Paris Peace Agreement, which is 2016, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Cambodia also commemorate the Paris Peace Agreement, and I was asked to give my reflection. I was giving a platform to give a speech, among other, and I believe that His Excellency Sam Rangsi and his party was invited at that time, although there was no Q&A, a lot of speeches, ambassador from Japan, ambassador from Indonesia, France, all these eminent people come and talk. And then there was a nice reception. There was a spirit of acknowledging from the government of Cambodia of the eminent contribution by all stakeholders involved. So to let you know that they will commemorate. Aside from that, this one is the first one that I involved with through you, Phil. Thank you for inviting me. But I can tell you, during the month of October, I will have to appear on webinar in four other events that going to related to the commemorations, and this is from Australia, but also from the Cambodian university. One university also want to discuss this, and they invite me as well to talk, and I accepted because we engage with young populations. And also I like to take this opportunity to inform you that we are working on, we meaning the Cambodian Institute for Cooperation and Peace, is working on a research paper producing a Paris Peace Agreement report, about 50 pages, grant under the grant from the US State Department. The US take the Paris Peace Agreement quite interestingly, in my view, not France, not Indonesia, who's co-chair, but US want to go on record. So I'm documenting this Paris Peace Agreement in the spirit of how we would want to remember this. And therefore, to say the least, in Cambodia, Japanese embassy, Australian embassy is very active. The Australian embassy is going to do, Joseph is going to speak. I will not speak, but I co-organize it. So I will watch you what you say on how we remember the Paris Peace Agreement. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to add here, beyond what Ambassador have mentioned, this is my second stake on Paris Peace Agreement, and I expect 4 more. So you could see there would be a lot of celebration organized by different sects, different agencies. Yeah, so well, I think while this is somehow a recognition by many of us on the significance of the Paris Peace Agreement. Like I mentioned, we should make Paris Peace Agreement spirit as a daily operation. We should not only come to discuss just because 23rd is the anniversary, especially the 30th anniversary, but we should make sure that we talk about it. We take the spirit and the end goal of the Paris Peace Agreement come to the realization. And secondly, I think on the government side, I think as you could see on the new Cambodian government just issue a new bill, the 30,000 real bill. I think 30 signify with the 30th anniversary. And with the image of the king, but also with the prime minister, holding hand, recognize the with the message of Paris Peace Agreement. I think somehow when we talking when we look at this, and I read a lot earlier that the Cambodian government keep denying that Paris Peace Agreement is a dead document. But having seen that, I feel that somehow the government signal that they also recognize the importance of Paris Peace Agreement. So while I think we can debate a lot with the new bill, because I think it's not just about political message, but I think from the economic point of view, it is also related with the what we call monetary policy management. But yeah, I mean, that's how it involved with the 30th anniversary of the Paris Peace Agreement. And yeah.
And Rancy, you have been traveling through the United States, and obviously you're now in Paris again. I mean, you're talking to a lot of Cambodians all around the world. about these sort of issues. What are you hearing, and what are your views?
Wherever there are Cambodians all over the world, and I would like to remind you that the Cambodian diaspora has approximately 1 million people. So on the 23rd of October, there will be conference, there will be discussions, and there will be also demonstration in the street, especially in Paris, where the agreements were signed. And for the first time, I have seen commitments from different groups who rarely work together, but who decided that they will join and show unity to ask for the real, effective, full implementation of the Paris Peace Agreement. We abroad, we don't feel the pressure as our compatriots who live in Cambodia. We know that the space for freedom of expression is rather limited. So we will use our freedom to speak our mind. And our mind has been reflected by what Gareth Evans said at the beginning of our discussion. I was able to hear what he said. And he is very realistic. We have to make a difference between being realistic and being cynical. In that sense, we have to recognize that there are some factors that have a lot of influence in the current situation. Human nature, fear to lose power on the part of Hun Sen, because power means impunity for Hun Sen. I think Hun Sen has no intention, because he has no interest to see the implementation of the Paris Peace Agreement. As I've just said at the beginning, it would imply real elections. The Paris Peace Agreement said authentic election. Authentic means real, and the contrary of real is fake. Hun Sen can only accept fake elections, because real elections will come to his losing power. And in losing power, he will lose everything. So don't believe 1 second that Hun Sen wants the implementation of the Paris Peace Agreement. It would mean the end of his regime through free, fair, open elections. I would like to recall what the president, special rapporteur, the previous special rapporteur, Professor Surya Subedi, he said, the Paris Peace Agreements remain relevant as long as the vision the vision contained in those Paris Agreement has not become a reality. So the vision is a Cambodia embracing a system of liberal, pluralist democracy. We are far away from this, and Hun Sen will never accept that Cambodia implement a system of liberal, pluralist democracy. I think we have to be realistic. We are not going to lose another 30 years by talking nice. Oh, time will help. Cambodians should talk together to achieve reconciliation. But this is beautiful words. But when you come to human nature, personal interest, vital personal interest, you can guess that Hun Sen will never accept any real implementation of the Paris Peace Agreement. So I understand those of my compatriots who live in Cambodia under very intense pressure. Those who speak up their mind are in difficult situation. And those who dare to speak up their minds are in the opposition, the open opposition. They are either assassinated or in jail or in exile. Being leaders of the opposition, there are only 3 fates. So the rest, in order to escape, to avoid these 3 difficult situations, you have to, to speak softer. You cannot expose the real truth that Hun Sen don't dream. Hun Sen will never, in spite of lip service and real intention are just the opposite. Hun Sen will never accept. So I think there will be change because of 3 factors. This is outside the Paris Peace Agreement. One is natural factor. Hun Sen, as like every one of us, is aging. The Hun Sen now is not the Hun Sen 10 years ago, even not the Hun Sen 5 years ago. Hun Sen now has to rethink how he's going to hold on and to pass on the power to his son. And this transitional from father to son in Hun Sen's mind will need some change because Hun Sen cannot transfer power to his son that easily. He will need some arrangement or pre-arrangement, more comprehensive agreement between different people from different backgrounds. So this is the first. Age, natural factor. Second factor is pressure from internal pressure within the CPP. And this is related to US sanctions, personal sanctions targeted against those who are Hun Sen supporters, very close to Hun Sen supporters, but who have sent their family into the US, have bought properties in the US, have transferred money to the US, and who like go back and forth to the US. But with the personal sanctions, those people will not be able to do as what they used to do. They risk losing their assets there. With those assets can be frozen, can be seized, and they are very, very frustrated. And frustrated, they will turn to Hun Sen and say, "What the hell have you been doing these last years? We are in trouble now. Personal interest, our personal interest is at stake. And with your siding, Hun Sen's siding with China, they have more and more, they will feel more and more pressure. This is, and they will turn to Hun Sen. And I think they will be willing and prepared to join any plan to move Hun Sen out. I think there are, because of the new circumstances, there are plans being thought now to move Hun Sen out. Because this is not related to Cambodians alone. If you only talk about democracy, very little hope. Because democracy in Cambodia, it affects only Cambodians. People do not pay that much attention. But if you talk about neutrality, as I've just mentioned, neutrality is one important point in the Paris Peace Agreement. Besides the democracy, there is neutrality. And neutrality, or the absence or the loss of neutrality, would affect not only the interests, but the security of many neighboring countries who do have influence on the situation in Cambodia. And the US is also pushing for Cambodia respecting a neutral stance. But I think it is too late now. Hun Sen cannot distance himself from China. Too late. And China will not move out from Cambodia. China will move more and more deeply, and it is irreversible. China will stay, and China will use Cambodia as an outpost, including a military outpost, to serve, to implement their expansionist policy. And this will affect many countries: Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Australia, until India. This great coalition of countries will not allow Hun Sen to turn Cambodia into a military outpost, because they will be affected by China's policy, expansionist policy. So there is great forces, powerful forces all over the world at work to bring about a change in Cambodia. But this is beyond the Cambodian discussing among themselves, as we are doing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ransi, for that. Unfortunately, Ambassador Sotirak has a previous engagement, so he had to depart. But I wanted to give the floor to Sapiep to react, and then I think we're going to move towards closing, because of course it's been almost an hour and 45 minutes for this. So please, the floor is yours, Sapiep.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Excellency, for sharing your thought earlier and caring. I guess that you point out that the Cambodian activists, or the speaker here are speak under pressure. I have to challenge that. Of course, I point out the issue that Cambodia is facing. The civic space is under stress, but I think we have to respect our own value and the role that we all have to contribute. And I'm here, and every day our work have been trying to promote and protect human rights. And I have to challenge the idea that local people, a lot of local people are working under pressure. Of course, we are, but it does not mean that when we speak out here, even at the moment, I think we speak through to power. So I think we can't just point out that people in the country, their speak is not should not be underestimated, and it should be recognized that. And secondly, I feel a bit troubled when hearing, of course, like when it comes to the political dilemma of how to say the political deadlock, the political deadlock. I try to recall the term. The Prime Minister keeps saying that no talk, he won't talk, like the Excellency point out. But on the other hand, I also hearing from you, here that there's no use to talk. PM would not change, or PM would not recognize the spirit of Paris Peace Agreement. So I think we could see either side keep kind of own perspective on the way forward for the Cambodian interest. That's why I point out in my early statement that we have to think about the larger population interest, not our own, not the party interest, not anyone's interest, but the people. So I encourage both the leader, the ruling and opposition party to value the peace process. Of course, when we're talking about peace process, it's not easy, and it's not a lip service neither. I think we have to give peace a chance, and that requires to come to the table. I think put the problem on the table, not put the problem behind the stake and one attack each other. I think it's no use. And I think if we look back to the Paris Peace Agreement 30 years ago, like I mentioned, like the people who joined hands to support the Paris Peace Agreement process, it took them 3 years. And at the time, there are conflict, there are war, there are arms. Why all of us can achieve some sort of, you know, the negative peace, we come to the table to agree on the restoration and peace building agenda for Cambodia. Why can't we make it work back then when it was even more challenges? Right now, Cambodia, as I mentioned, everywhere we can see saying peace. Why can't we achieve it? So I don't know, you know, I think we really need to give peace a chance, and we really need to kind of trust each other more. I think I totally agree with other speakers in different panel. I think the Cambodian problem is trust. So we have to learn how to trust each other, and we should value the peace process as the Paris Peace Agreement spirit point out. And I think I would end my message here as well, that I hope, you know, any leader will work together and to make, you know, if we're talking about the election, which is a core value of democracy, let us make election more joyful, not more, you know, tearful, you know, like we come, I remember in early 90, you know, the first election that Cambodia have celebrated with the support from the UN. Back then I was so young, but I remember quite well, my parents went out and went out to vote. And when they come back, they were smiling and we were excited. And as a young at the time, I also want to vote, you know, so I feel the election was joyful. So I think if we want to really make democratic work, let us try to work together to make election a joyful and exciting moment for Cambodian. And second, I think when it comes to the democratic space, somehow I think we have been struggling toward the real democracy. But I think in the early 20 and up to the point before the you know, the 2014, 13 and 14, where we have a historic election result where the opposition almost gained the balance with the ruling party. I think somehow we were on the right track. Of course, you know, the road is not smoothly, it's still bumpy, but we are on the right track. However, after a while, we derail from the road. So let us come together to work on the right track again, give the democratic space a chance as well. And finally, again, you know, I really wish to see leader as the, you know, like all politicians, both the Prime Minister, both the Excellency here and other, let us build a legacy that, you know, Cambodian as a young generation, like I myself and other, can see, you know, like leader can come together and build reconciliation, and that is important. And if we can achieve it, I think it's really something remarkable that we make the Paris Peace Agreement a really, you know, lively. Thank you.
Phil, could I put two last remarks?
Yes, yes, please. Yes, please. And then we're going to wrap up.
Yes. I think our personal feelings, our goodwill are very important. But there's another important factor, more important, which is geopolitics. Elizabeth Baker reminded us of two dates. One is 1989, when Vietnam decided to pull out some of her troops, and it was the beginning of the talks. And the second year was 1991, the year of the signing of the Paris Agreement themselves. What does 1989 represent? It's the fall of the Berlin Wall. And 1991, what does that year correspond to? To the collapse of the Soviet Union. Without these two events, there will be no Paris Peace Agreement. 1989, collapse of the Berlin Wall, the beginning of the collapse of the Soviet Union bloc. And Vietnam understood that the Soviet Union would not help Vietnam in such a massive way. So first signal, Vietnam withdraw some of her troops from Cambodia. In 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union, definitely there is no way the Soviet Union would help Vietnam maintain her troops in Cambodia. The regime, the Hun Sen Heng Sovereignty regime would collapse without the support of Vietnam, with it used to be the Soviet Union behind. So this is geopolitics, and this has led to the signing of the Paris Peace Agreement. It is not goodwill of Cambodians, blah, blah, blah. No, it is not, would not be enough. Second, now, what can we do to break the deadlock? Don't wait for the opposition meeting Hun Sen accepting to meet the opposition. We have been waiting for many years already. I would like to make one suggestion. Let's implement. Every party support the recommendations, the last report, recommendation contained in the last report of the special rapporteur. No need for me to say anything more. No need for Hun Sen to say anything more if he agrees. Let's implement those recommendations. And then you can break the deadlock immediately and read it. And the special rapporteur said there should be election with the participation of the opposition. There should be broadening of a political space. There should be release of political prisoners. There should be a drop of charges levied against opposition leaders and opposition activists. So I don't need to talk with Hun Sen about that. Hun Sen does not need to talk with me about that. Let's implement the recommendation of the special rapporteur. And I hope that any democracy lovers in Cambodia will support this proposition. It doesn't come from sovereignty, it comes from the United Nations, and the United Nations which helped organize the very peace agreement on Cambodia in 1991.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you. Well, first of all, thank you to both to Sam Rainsy and to Chak Sophia for joining us and sticking with us right to the end. Thank you also to Elizabeth Becker and Ambassador Pu Sutirak, who was also here earlier. I would like to say that, on behalf of the Foreign Correspondents Club, it's a real privilege to be able to host this forum. I want to thank you for joining us. My remarks would be simply that, unfortunately, beyond these immediate celebrations that will happen in the next week, I feel that the international community has increasingly forgotten Cambodia, that other things have come up, that other issues have become more important. And the unfortunate part about that is that, the Cambodian people still are facing major problems on human rights, democracy, development, land confiscation, the whole list of issues. And ultimately that without the engagement of the international community to continue to support the spirit of the Paris Peace Accords and to continue to support the idea of human rights and democracy, it's going to be much tougher a road to hoe in Cambodia in the coming years. So hoping that through this and through other opportunities, we'll see increased international re-engagement with Cambodia by like-minded countries, by countries of goodwill that are supporting the aspirations of the Cambodian people, for respect for their rights, for basic civil liberties, and for the democracy that was envisioned in the Paris Peace Accords. Finally, I'd like to say, actually, I started my career really back in the late 80s and was involved with the Solars subcommittee many years ago. Stephen Solars, who was involved in coming up with some of these ideas and talking with Gareth Evans and working on these issues. And, 30 years on, the idea of democracy and human rights in Cambodia still animates so much discussion about Cambodia. And now that, while the country is at peace, the next steps need to be taken. And I hope that we will continue these conversations. I want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you also to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand and all the staff who were staying late tonight to make this happen. And also to the people who are watching, please support the club. Please support independent journalism. Make a donation to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. There's ways to do that through the office, through our website. And we look forward to seeing you at a future engagement, another event coming forward. There's many more coming on Myanmar, on Thailand in the coming weeks. Thank you so much and good night.